with some introduction. My name is Angela Wang. I'm going to be a rising senior at, is that going, Rishi? Okay, cool. So yeah, just for your, just for you to know, this session is going to be recorded. So anything you say and just video is going to be recorded as well. So my name is Angela Wang. I'm going to be a senior this year in high school, and I'm the president of the Women on Wall Street initiative.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm going to be a junior next year at Plano West, and I am the secretary of W.O.W.
Hi everyone, I'm Caitlin. I'm going to be a sophomore at Jasper High School, and I'm currently the vice president of W.O.W.
So just as a little bit of background of what this initiative is and what we have going for the summer, essentially we are an initiative of Cash Club Corp, which tries to inspire students to be more engaged in finance. And so the Women on Wall Street initiative is specifically to try to increase female engagement in the field, which is traditionally male dominated. And so throughout this month of June, we've been hosting more and more curriculum content, educating people on our social media pages, specifically about this growing intersection between STEM and finance. And so we wanted to cap out the month with a perfect guest speaker, Miss Nora Lee. And so she doesn't need that much introduction, but for those that don't know, Miss Nora Lee is currently the Chief Marketing Officer of the award-winning fintech app Invstr. She graduated from Harvard University with a major in economics, and she also happens to be an alumni from the Texas Academy of Math and Science. And so we are incredibly grateful to have Miss Nora Lee here with us today.
Well, thank you, Angela, Lucy, and Caitlin. It's wonderful to be here today, and it's wonderful to see women taking an initiative to promote finance because, I think finance is fun, it's exciting, and for your generation, you live in a time where it's accessible to everybody because of the advent of the mobile phone. So I think it's fantastic what you all are doing. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with this presentation. Ms. Nora Lee is going to first share some of her own thoughts, and then in the second half, we'll open up for a Q&A. So just as a first question, kind of how did you get your own start into finance, whether that was starting in college, and how did you just find yourself in this position of starting and being a very big part of Invstr?
Well, that's a good question because I know when I was your age, we all have ideas about what we want to be when we graduate and we're older. And I never really intended to be in finance. I actually wanted to be a lawyer at first, but I was always very interested in the markets. And we didn't have an investment club in high school, but we did have one at university. And you'd have to get the newspaper to actually see where stocks were. And I just picked stocks that I'd heard about through other people that sounded interesting, that were apparently doing well. But there was a book I read called Liar's Poker. It's a fantastic book. I actually recommend everybody read it because it talks about how the markets were originally run by the traders, and then in the 80s, they got physicists involved into the markets, and they started to model how markets move, options markets, and it really changed the dynamic of the financial services business because there was more science behind what was happening. And this book I just found fascinating. And I recommend it as a read. And I read this book, I applied for law school, and everybody was applying for jobs. I ended up also applying for jobs, and I got one of 2 offers in trading for our entire graduating class. And I thought this would actually be really fun to go to the Chicago Board of Trade and get paid to learn about the markets. So that's how it started. It wasn't by design. It was a bit of an accident having read this book, Liar's Poker.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, Invstr plays a very critical role in this intersection between STEM and finance. Obviously, it's very tech-based, but at the same time, it's about the stock market. And so personally, from your own experience, what do you foresee for this growing intersection of STEM and finance for the future?
Well, I think we're really at the beginning stages of what's happening in fintech. And we had a call with a VC last week, and the way they phrased it is they said, we're in the first inning of what's happening. So many sectors have been disrupted, but the financial services has not really been disrupted as much because it was an old boys network, and they had a nice business with a lot of intermediaries where you could make a lot of money. So I think going forward, what you're going to see is that education will be the key of driving the financial revolution. Finance is already digitized, but what you need is you need people to have access to it, to have the confidence about it and the knowledge about it to go and do it for themselves. And particularly since you're women, what's fascinating is that women invest 40% less than men. They don't have the same confidence that a man has. And men have this fear, what they found is of missing out on the markets, so they want to invest, whereas women have the fear of losing their money. But women save more than men. So there's this interesting dynamic, and I think through education, like on Invstr, where you can take the academy, you can learn about the markets, you can practice by playing a game and learn how the stocks actually move, you can get that confidence to then go do it for real. But I think it's very important, particularly for women, because one, women live longer than men. Two, you generally get paid 80% of what a man gets paid. So if you think about, we're starting at a lower base. So you have to start investing at a younger age in order to have wealth accumulated for when you are older and you're living longer.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's a really interesting segue into, I guess, the next thing I want to touch on. So obviously you've had many, many years in this industry, both of which STEM and finance, like you mentioned, are quite male dominated. And so I was wondering if you could maybe share some of your own unique experiences that you think you've faced as a woman and how you think you've maybe overcome any specific obstacles throughout this journey.
Right. Well, first, let me just take a step back and say, I grew up in a household with 5 older brothers, so I was always in a sort of male-dominated household. So for me, that was just normal. But when I did start my first job in bond options, Chicago Board of Trade, 30-year bond options pit, the most active pit in the world, it was the first year that Cooperneff, which was the organization that hired me, had hired women into the program. And I didn't see it as anything bad. I just thought, wow, this is cool. This is an opportunity. And I never really identified myself just like, hey, I'm a woman, I'm in finance, it's male dominated. I was there really because I wanted to learn and I wanted to be good, and I'm competitive. And when you're competitive, you want to learn, but there are a lot of obstacles. And it's just the nature of the industry itself. One, it can be a very aggressive industry. And what I found my nature was I like to please people. I want to make people happy. And, at the end of the year when you get a bonus and, you just say thank you, whereas most of the guys would be upset and arguing and saying, I deserve this. What I learned actually is I had to be more aggressive in this industry because that was just the culture. So when I learned how to go ask to get paid more money, I think those were very important things to learn early on. I never had anybody teach me that or tell me that because that's not how I was necessarily raised. But that's something very important, a very important hurdle, particularly for women, I think, because we tend to say thank you and accept, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't upset people, but shows that you know your worth and your value and what you've brought to the business. The second thing is learning. It's a very competitive industry, and everybody feels like you may be a threat to them, whether you're a man or a woman. So when I was first working, I was very frustrated because people don't want to share knowledge with you. They don't want to share information with you. And how do you learn? You learn from others, from asking questions. So I was constantly trying to find somebody that could potentially be a mentor or somebody that would feel comfortable enough to share the knowledge, because ultimately what I realized is finance is pretty simple. And so there's this shield that they try to make it seem like it's really complicated when in fact it's pretty simple. So you could learn it really easily. It doesn't discriminate against, your age. A 10-year-old could be better investing than, a 50-year-old who's been in the markets for a long time. It doesn't discriminate on age, on ethnicity, on gender. And it's a very simple business, I think. And we have the luxury that, we've got so much information now online. When I first started working, I learned how to do, we didn't have Excel when I was in college. I learned how to do Excel at work. I got an email while I was at work. So I had to learn a lot on the job, which was great. So you have to be open to learning. I read a lot of books because people were not willing to share knowledge with me. So I read a lot, but I was always trying to go out and be active with others in the industry. Important. I think that human element of being, interested in others and being sincere and genuine about who you are, but also participating in the social side, outside of work, because I find when people are in a more social environment, they feel less threatened and they're more willing to talk about their experiences and teach you. So getting used to that sort of environment, took some time. I was a bit frustrated at first, but you get used to it. And then what I did when I was working and sort of going higher up, I always made it a point to try to teach others because I knew how frustrated I was that people didn't want to teach me because they felt, it was just so competitive. But the ultimate truth was, I think finance is really, it's common sense. It's quite logical and it can be quite irrational as well. But those were some of the biggest hurdles that I faced. But, I found, being a woman, it's in a way can be an advantage because you stand out. So I would never look at it as being a disadvantage. I just look at it as being an advantage, but the nature sometimes can be less aggressive. So sometimes you have to be firm and aggressive when you're, particularly in the markets. But the beauty with apps now, you can, there's so much you can do online that it, none of this really matters anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like how you touch on it almost being an advantage and just using these situations to your own advantage. And so kind of down that line of what you were saying of how when beginner investors start this entire journey, they are quite afraid. And I think a lot of people believe that it's a very complicated process that they're just scared to get involved in. And so as a CMO of Invstr, what specific advice would you share to maybe a beginner investor that's kind of scared in first starting this entire stock market process?
Well, one, I would say it's actually exciting because if you think about markets, it's everything. It's psychology, it's politics, it's your preferences, what's happening. All of this is reflected in a stock market. And so I actually think stock markets are one of the most exciting things that's out there because it incorporates so many aspects of the world. And the second thing I would say is you only learn by doing, so it's until you do something, you don't really know what it's like. So you shouldn't be scared. And the beauty of what we've built at Invstr is we've created a gamified way for you to learn through a virtual portfolio. And I would say that's probably one of the best ways to learn. It's like when you're trying to, learn a new sport or learn to play an instrument. It may look very difficult at first and you learn a few notes, you practice by playing a simulated game and then reading. It's important to read the news and read about what companies are doing. I mean, Facebook, I'm sure everybody's on Facebook or Snapchat, and you read the news of what's happened with Facebook. Coca-Cola and a few other advertisers are not advertising on there anymore. Well, it's common sense. Less people are spending money on your platform. So what's that going to do to a stock price? Stock price is going to drop. So what happened to the stock price of Facebook? It dropped. It's all very logical. So if you think about it like that, it's really something that anybody could learn to do. And so the more time you spend playing the game or educating yourself, reading the news and thinking, oh, this news came out. Yeah, that's probably negative. Oh, the stock dropped. This news came out. It's positive. Zoom, you have COVID. And now, you go from 20 million people to 200 million people doing business over Zoom or getting together like your organization over Zoom. You can realize, oh, that's probably good for the stock. Stock's going to go up. It's common sense. And that's what everybody needs to know is markets are common sense. And so if you stick to your common sense, you'll realize it's actually quite easy and it's actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think the beginning is intimidating for many, but I think when you start the process, it definitely gets less scary. So kind of back on this topic of specifically women who want to enter these fields. So I certainly know that one roadblock for a lot of women is just that they're generally pretty scared and don't think that they can be as successful. So what do you think is maybe a piece of advice you would share as a highly successful woman in these fields?
Well, particularly because I know, the women on Wall Street, you all are, not only interested in finance, but you're interested in STEM. So if you look at the numbers, women perform better as investors than men. So the science is behind you. Women are actually better investors. I think on average, it's like 50 basis points a year that a woman makes more than a man, which is 0.5%. So we are naturally good investors. It's just like you say, we don't know that, we don't have the confidence. And so you just got to get over it. You just got to do it and believe in yourself. And it's like anything in life. I think if you believe you can do it, you can do it. And as Nike says, you just got to do it. So the sooner you do it, the better. It's really that simple. And I wish I would have been investing when I was a teenager. I remember getting a birthday present from my grandmother, and it was a bond. And I think I was like 7 years old. And of course, she's thinking long-term, and I'm thinking boring. But my first stocks I bought were when I was working, and it was the dot-com boom and bust. And I made a lot of money, and I lost a lot of money really fast, but those were the best lessons. So if you don't let those hurdles of, oh, I've lost some money on investment hold you back, and you just realize, hey, I've learned something here about, bubbles or a business having to be sustainable, and not just trendy, but have some real revenue behind it. I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously a lot of the people who are on this call are high school students that may right now think that they have some interest in these STEM and finance fields, but they're maybe not as sure where to start. So do you have any advice for high school students specifically of like particular courses or like internships or opportunities that they can get more involved and acquainted into these fields?
I do think it's really important to do internships. When I was in high school, I did 2 summer internships at banks, which made me think I didn't want to work for banks. But what's important is to use the network. And your generation is so lucky because you've got networks like LinkedIn, you've got families maybe who have friends, and you can connect with them on LinkedIn. And don't be scared to ask somebody if you could maybe shadow them, for a week at their business. Like myself, I love it when somebody's interested and wants to learn. I'm always pro letting people have an experience because I know what an impact it makes. So it's very important to ask. And it's very important to network amongst people that you know. And think about if your parents, went to university, if they've got an alumni network that you can tap into about potential summer internships. And I know, it's very difficult right now to find jobs, and you all are living in a set of circumstances with the way the world is right now. But the more you ask, the more you realize there are opportunities to help people or, participate or shadow. So it's important just to ask and to start now, across any field. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. And so for students that are looking to enter the field of finance, what do you think are particular skills that maybe a decade, 2 decades from now would probably be most helpful for them to start honing in on?
One, I think, a skill that's very important is adaptability. So the ability to, be thrown into one place, but then be able to think out of the box, think forward and adapt. And people don't really talk about that as much. And when I was working in my day in the banking world as a trader, they wanted you to specialize. But I think it's very important. You never know what's going to happen, that you can, I went from fixed income, then went to program trading, then went to hedge fund, then went to managing my own portfolio, then went into an advisory role, then started investing in startups, then ended up in fintech and putting it all together. And none of it was by design, but it was the ability to adapt, be put in a situation and learn. And you must have resilience. I think you get what I hear from friends of mine that are, say, in finance right now with traditional banks and younger generations coming in, they say they struggle managing them because there's not a lot of resilience. And they want in 6 months that I've accomplished this and that I get a lot of praise and feedback, and that's not how it necessarily works. And so they get frustrated. So you've got to learn to give it time to grow, and don't let the knocks, discourage you. It's actually, you learn more from those than you do from early success. So resilience, I think, is very important. yes, you got to be good. You got to be good with numbers. You know, if you're going to be in finance or STEM, you've got to be good with numbers, but you also have to understand, you know, the people that you're catering to. So say if you're going into fintech, particularly, which is being disrupted, to engage, you know, more women to be investing, to engage younger generations so that they start investing younger, you got to know your audience. And, you know, for myself, say on the marketing side, you know, that's been new for me too. But I've got 16 nieces and nephews who are, you know, your age and even younger, but to understand your audience and how they like to consume information, you know, in bite sizes, audio, through a game, you know, socially, you know. So knowing your audience, you're at an advantage because your generation, 85% believe that they can manage their own investments and feel that, you know, technology just empowers them to do that. So your generation is going in with the right mindset. And if you are that generation, you understand what they like. So you have that advantage over somebody like myself, who's not from your generation. So it's not a skill set, but it's just something, knowing your audience and being in tune with it. I think it's important to read a lot, you know, read what competitors are doing, read what's happening in your industry, you know, from various news sources, because you've got to be informed. And with technology, things change so quickly. So it's very important to be thinking, you know, forward and not, you know, thinking about what was happening yesterday, but thinking about what's going to be happening in the future. So that is also very important. And I don't know if I give you specifics, you know, more specifics than that, but I think all of those combined, I think will set up anybody well for finance or anything in STEM.
For sure. And I think it's really interesting how you talk about adaptability a lot, because I feel like you mentioned at the beginning, both of these industries are so rapidly changing. And so it's just kind of staying on your feet. Yeah, for sure. So definitely as a chief marketing officer of Invstr, you are a boss, I'm assuming, of a lot of people underneath you. And so I guess what we wanted to ask from your perspective is, what specific things do you think someone can do to set themselves apart, maybe if they're going after a job or an internship that's super competitive?
I think attitude is very important. And nobody teaches you this when you're in school, attitude, but what you find, you know, particularly in a startup, or even when I was working in different organizations, you get somebody with a bad attitude, it ruins the ambiance, it ruins the dynamic of a team. And everybody may be superb at what they do and contribute, but you get one bad attitude that's always trying to stop somebody's great idea because they think it wasn't theirs, or they just say no to everything. Attitude makes a big difference. So what I would say, somebody comes in with a great attitude, you just like immediately you take notice. Somebody comes in with a bad attitude, you're just not interested. Somebody's open-minded, you know, willing to listen and hear different ideas, and doesn't think they always have, you know, the best idea. They may, you know, be confident about what they think, but they're willing to listen. I think it's very important in the working world to be able to listen to others. So, you know, skills, I've always believed it's easier to teach somebody how to do something than it is to teach them to have the right attitude. And I think attitude goes a long way with employers. I mean, they say that you make a decision like in the first 10 seconds when somebody walks in, by the way they carry themselves, by the way they engage with you, you know, eye contact as well is very important. So those would be my recommendations. And they're things that you don't get taught attitude in school, but hopefully, you know, you learn it throughout your life, you know, with your family at home as well and through your friends.
Yeah, so definitely that aspect of soft skills, I think, is something that's very important. You mentioned that. I feel like school puts a really big emphasis on hard skills without as much of the, I guess, like social environment that comes with all these careers, for sure. So especially as the chief marketing officer, we were wondering if there are maybe any specific challenges that Invstr faced in the marketing aspect, and how, like, are there any pieces of advice that you would probably give to anyone who's trying to maybe market their own startup or anything like that?
Well, I think you have, you know, there are different ways to market, and I'm learning every day. I'll be honest, I was never really a big user of TikTok, and I just spent 2 hours on TikTok on Friday night, and I can see how it's so addictive, and this ability to, you know, create content in a fun way with music and dance moves. It's very engaging. So I'm now having to think about, okay, what's our marketing strategy? How can we use TikTok, particularly because they've engaged a massive audience on TikTok and they realize they want to become more educational. So they're putting a lot of effort behind learning through TikTok. So I'm thinking about, how do we take our academy in small bite sizes and put it on TikTok? How do we teach, investing, is fun. It's, you can learn through play. That's how we all normally learn. And putting this on a format like TikTok, that's a challenge for me because I've never used TikTok. I've never created a video on TikTok. So I'm learning, and I know it's a very important channel right now. And I think it's going to potentially eclipse many of the other social channels out there. I mean, traditionally, it's been Facebook, Google or Snapchat are the best ways to market because you want to market digitally. I think the old-fashioned ways of marketing, it's not interesting for us as a fintech app. You're usually going to get somebody who's on another app or on their phone, on the browser. That's the way you're going to find people. But you also need to think about having a PR company and thinking about, how do you create content that's interesting for a journalist to go write about what you're doing? So recently we had, Forbes did an article about Invstr, how comparing how sports and investing is very, very similar. And actually sports stars who are very good at what they do and they're used to training and they're very disciplined and they practice, they actually, the ones that have made publicly known investments have outperformed the markets. So a lot of these skills are transferable if you're disciplined, you learn, and you buy things that, make a lot of common sense, things that you use.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. So kind of along the line of fintech in itself. So what, I guess incentivized you, or what led you to transition from this very traditional field of finance to this field of financial technology into Invstr?
Right. So going back to what I said, I wanted to be a lawyer when I grew up. Where I've ended up, nothing has been by design. And I think it's great advice for you all. Nobody ever gave me that advice, but it's great advice to sometimes allow yourself to think out of the box. Ended up in finance. You had, the 2008 recession came. Banks weren't going to do trading and take risk on trading anymore. So my job essentially got phased out. So I left, not really wanting to, but there was nothing to do anymore. So I sort of took a step back and didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up doing advisory roles, so advising companies that were raising capital. And it ended up being in energy. It's not something that I'd done in the past, but I'd invested in energy stocks. So I took that on. It ended up a lot of the people that had energy companies were also invested in tech companies and startup companies. They liked working with me as a person. And that's where, the attitude and your ability to listen to people comes into play. And then they wanted me to start advising and sort of be a conduit on these tech startup companies. And that's how I started to get more into the startup space. And then with friends who had been in technology, they put together syndicates to invest together, bringing different people's knowledge of the industry to decide, are we going to invest in this company or not? So I started to invest in companies as a syndicate with other people, and started to get to know who developers were, started to get to know about PR companies. But I was also doing a lot of, networking, going to tech conferences, shaking people's hands. And I was traditionally quite shy, but you just have to force yourself to do it. And you realize the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Just like investing, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So that was happening. And then, ending up in fintech, actually, that was also another fluke. I was contacted on LinkedIn by Derhalli, who's the founder of Invstr. And he had wanted a woman's perspective on the app that he was building. So he had me, he remembered me when I used to work at Deutsche Bank, and he was at Deutsche Bank that I was, one of the only female traders there. And he's like, I'd love to hear your views on it. And I was like, oh, I hadn't heard from this guy in 8 years. He connected with me, beta test my app. I said, of course. I was curious to know what he was doing. And that's sort of my entree into Invstr was through LinkedIn, getting connected to be a beta tester. And I thought it was really interesting what he was looking to do. And then a whole personal story evolved from that, which was he and I eventually fell in love, and he's now my husband. But I was still involved with my own business, and I didn't necessarily want to mix and work for him. And at the end of last year, he said, I think you would be just fantastic to run our marketing. Our business is growing, and to tie in your experience in the markets combined with your experience in startups to help run the business. And I must say it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. But again, none of this was by design. I just was always curious and just willing to learn and wanting to hear what other people were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like so cool that you didn't necessarily plan to end up here, but you still made it big. So I guess this is kind of a broader question, but it's maybe one that high schoolers who have their head in their books and like really focus on their scores maybe can hear. But how does your team at Invstr define success?
That's a good question. Our values at Invstr, we believe in diversity, collaboration, and empowerment. And we think, those three things lead to success. So we would define success in a way by living out those three values. And if you're talking more from a business perspective, or are you talking more from a personal perspective?
I think both are probably valuable, yeah.
From a business perspective, for us, what we want to do at Invstr, how we will define our success, is by making investing and finance accessible to all and making it fun and social, because we think it should be. So having discovered Cash Club on Invstr was very exciting when our head of social media said, hey, there's this great group, and they're down in Dallas, and they've got 16 branches throughout the US, and they're trying to spread investing. It's like, oh my gosh, they're on the same wavelength as us. And then when they told me that y'all were setting up WOW, I thought, okay, this is fantastic, trying to be pushing the female angle, because not as many women as invest. So for me, I already feel successful in that way, that we're engaging with your generation, because your generation is the future. So the fact that we resonate already with your generation, for me, that's successful. But I want it to resonate with all the Gen Zers and millennial generation out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in regards to the current situation with COVID, we're wondering what your take is on how the COVID-19 outbreak may specifically impact startups or just companies in this fintech field.
Look, it's been great for a lot of startups, particularly because people are at home, they're having to use more technology as a result. They're on their phones more, they're using more gaming apps, a lot of, retail investors in the market. There's been a lot of talk about how, the market's going up is driven by this new generation of investors in the market, and it's not dumb money. They used to refer to it as dumb money. It's smart money. So people are wanting to learn, they're wanting to educate themselves, which is great. So a lot of companies, it's been a huge boon for them. Their reach has increased, their engagement has gone up. And of course, for others, particularly anything travel, hospitality, Uber, etc. The Wing, or these sort of physical location-based WeWork. I used to have an office at WeWork back in the day. It's been very bad, for those companies. But if you think about the last recession we had, a lot of great companies, you had WhatsApp came out, after the 2008 crash, Instagram, you had all these great companies came out. So I think you're going to see a lot of great companies come out of COVID. And what one must always remember is we learn, and there is a resiliency in the economy. As bad as the news likes to be, I don't try to let it get me down in terms of where they think this is going. But I think we'll see a lot of great companies come out of this.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a very good point that some companies have really taken a hit, but some have just flourished under these conditions. Yeah, for sure. So for students who maybe want to start specifically on Invstr or just investment in general, do you have maybe some tips for how they can get started to know which stocks they like best? Because like you were saying, I guess you heard it from word of mouth when you started, but how can they kind of get acquainted to knowing where they should, I guess, invest their money?
Okay. It's a good question. What I always say is, look, we all have a financial footprint. Think about your own life. What phone do you have? Do you have, an Android, or do you have Samsung? Do you have Apple? Do you own some Nikes? Do you go to Starbucks? What do you use to stream movies? Is it Netflix? Is it Disney Plus? Is it Amazon Prime? Think about everything you do in your daily life. You're already a participant in that stock's price because you're adding to their bottom line by consuming that. So think about that. That's what you like. It must be good to some extent. And then what I would say is look at how those stocks have performed and see if maybe that looks interesting, versus the broader market. You can also, if you don't know what you want to buy, so I say, start with what you do and what you know and what you yourself like to own, because there's a good reason why you like to own it, because it's probably a good company. And then you can also do an exchange traded fund, which is an ETF, which just gives you exposure to the broader market. If you don't want to choose a stock, you can just get exposure to the broader market, be it, the S&P, which is the top 500 stocks, or the NASDAQ, which is, tech, or think about sectors that you like. I mean, I'm a big believer in tech. I think we're just going to continue to see great innovations coming out of tech. Biotech may be something that's interesting as well, given the pandemic that's happened. People are going to care more about, what's happening in that space and more research going into it. So maybe that's a sector. So you can look at sectors and then pick some of the top big names in there. But you can't go wrong either way. I think I would personally stay away from penny stocks. I wouldn't touch those. You want to invest in companies that are solid, that are names that are out there. Penny stocks, they call them pump and dump because traditionally they were manipulated by unsuspecting, they call it moms and pops. These brokers would call up moms and pops who didn't know and tell them, oh, you can make a fortune on this. And they tend to be more naive. What you see is your generation is not naive. You guys will go research. You'll have all the information there on your fingertips. You'll know this is valid or not, or was there a bad review here about this company? Was there, some scam going on? But I would say if you're using it, you guys are ahead of the trend. So, I heard about Instagram through my little, nieces and nephews, long before I even knew what Instagram was. And then I got bought, by Facebook for $1 billion. So you guys know the trends. So in a way, you guys have an edge over the other generations. So just start with something. And if you don't like it, you can always get out of it. But I would always have a level where there's a certain amount you don't want to lose, so that if you do see something's not working, something's gone wrong, maybe you want to get out. But also think about your time horizon. Is it something you're going to buy for the long haul? Like maybe you're thinking about cryptocurrencies. I have some friends who just said, look, I've just bought it and I've put it aside and I'm not going to think about it for 10 years because I think this is a revolution that's happening in terms of, the currency markets, and it's very volatile. So if you look at it, you're going to panic. So sometimes it helps to have that sort of mindset where what's your horizon? I'm going to buy it and just set it aside because it's a longer term trend.
Yeah, absolutely. So for students that may right now have a really strong passion in STEM and they obviously see the growing market of finance, what do you think is maybe an easy way that they can try to dip their toes in just that field and kind of get acquainted with finance if maybe, I guess it seems intimidating or they don't have that much of a start in finance?
To dip their toes in finance in terms of
so kind of cross-applying their passion in STEM and how can they, I guess, incorporate finance into the work that they do in STEM?
Right. Well, it's all about, coding. I wish I'd taken some coding classes years ago, but I don't know how to code, so I wish I knew how to code. I think a woman who can code, they want you by the dozen because there's a big lack of women who code, and particularly in any fintech company. So you're at a massive advantage because companies want to be diversified. They want to hire, women. So if you code, I think you're at a huge, huge advantage, from mathematics and statistics and being able to do data analysis. It's all about the data. The data is telling you the story. So when you're looking at the business, you're seeing what users are doing, when they're doing it. You have to figure out why they're doing it. So you're analyzing data. So if you're great with the math and doing all the quantitative analysis, you're also at a big advantage to be working in finance. So, coding, data analysis, I think those two are very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So with our last question before we probably open up for some Q&A, so for a lot of these students who are going to be going into college right now or in a couple of years, how do you think that they can start building that network that you talk about is so important?
Yeah, I think it's really important when you meet somebody to connect with them digitally. So whatever social platform it is that you use, and if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, like, you should set one up now. Like, I've told my nieces and nephews, you need a LinkedIn profile. I had a nephew visiting me last summer, and we were having a Harvard reunion that I was hosting at my place. And I said, you're going to meet people here. It's like, one used to work for the MBA, one works for this. I was like, get their names, go connect with them on LinkedIn. And I think one has to be very cognizant about that. It's important because you never know when that one relationship that you established, and you don't want a business card, you lose a business card, but if you got them connected on LinkedIn, which is the professional place to connect, I think then you sort of got that contact, for life, and you can leverage that. So I would start doing that now. When you meet people, send a little note, say, thank you, it was so nice to meet you, LinkedIn. I'm always very impressed when your generation does that, because not most do it. They're more on the social networks instead of the LinkedIn, but I think it's important to start now, and people take notice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a good point that starting young, it's not like, even if you don't have a job just yet, it's always good to set your foundation so that when you're ready, you can expand. For sure, yeah.
Something old-fashioned as well. Sorry, I'm going to interject. Is writing a letter to say thank you. If, say, somebody hosted you and they said, oh, come shadow with me, if you actually take the time to write a letter and send it to the person who gave you that opportunity, that means a lot as well, because it's very easy. People send text messages or WhatsApps or, a LinkedIn message, but to actually write a letter means a lot. So think about that as well. I know it's not as common, but it does make an impact, and you stand out from everybody else who didn't write a letter. And Absolutely. Even if you don't get the job, you've interviewed for, send a letter to say thank you for the opportunity, because that person's going to think about you a different way as a result of that.
Yeah, for sure. I guess just making yourself show that you are dedicated and that you care, no matter if you get the job or not. Yeah, for sure. Very valuable. Okay. So for all the participants, we're going to open up the floor for any questions you might have for Nora Lee. So the way we can go about this is just for your reactions, you can just go ahead and raise your hand, and then we'll have you unmute and ask your question out loud. So for anyone that might be interested in asking a question, go ahead and just raise your hand, and then we can ask some questions. Okay, so it looks like we have one for Rucha. So
what's your name?
Hi, my name is Rucha. Hi. So me and my two partners created Sloth just a couple of months ago, and I'm the CMO and CFO of Sloth. And I was wondering if you have any tips for rising entrepreneurs.
Yeah, can you tell me about, I don't know your business, tell me about your business.
Yes, so it's a time management and productivity focused app. We actually pitched to a VC firm in Palo Alto called Radar Partners, and we won my school's pitch competition with Sloth.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well done. I mean, hats off to you for setting, time management, I think it is so important. And the fact that you've already had that experience pitching, I think it is wonderful. To connect to investors is so important. There's a lot of angel networks that are out there. I don't know what stage you're at in the business, but getting a good seeding partner And primarily, particularly since you're in the States, I think connecting into anybody in Austin or in Palo Alto, I think would be really wonderful. You can, connect on to Crunchbase. I don't know if you're familiar with Crunchbase, but if you know any companies that are similar to yours, you can search them on Crunchbase, which is essentially a database of all the VCs out there, all the startups out there. And it will show you who's invested in what, so you can see what sort of investors might be interesting to you. And then you can go to their websites, get the details, and send information. But usually events that are organized for startups where you go and can meet potential investors is a good place, to start. There's also, right now everything's on hold because of COVID, but Austin, there's South by Southwest. There's so many tech conferences, and if you just Google tech conferences, you'll find all of them, but particularly for, early stage accelerators are great as well. There's Techstars. I don't know if you're familiar with Techstars.
Not that much, no.
Okay, you should check out Techstars. They're global, and they're a bit of an accelerator. So groups like that are great places for you. Y Incubator, TechCrunch. I don't know if you read TechCrunch, but TechCrunch is a great sort of daily newsletter of all the top stories, who's doing what. So it's important to read TechCrunch, Crunchbase. Wired magazine is great for startups as well, and it gets you in the know of who's doing what, and then it becomes a domino effect. You start talking to one, and then if you speak, this group that you met with in Palo Alto where you won the competition, make sure you connect with everybody on LinkedIn, and then ask them if they know other people that would be interested. Always ask, if somebody says, no, I'm not interested, always ask, do you know somebody else who might be interested? And even if they are interested, are there other people we should be speaking to that we're not speaking to? Never be afraid to ask, because, knowledge is power. And if you ask, you're just going to have more knowledge and more power.
Got it. Thank you so much for this advice. I really appreciate it.
I hope to hear more about Sloth in the future.
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like we have a second question from Shreya. So Shreya, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi. So how do you know if this is the right field for you? Like, any indicators, I know you mentioned some qualities earlier, but how do you know that this is the right realm for you?
How do you know if a field is the right field for you? That's amazing. That's a great question. As I said, sometimes you have to be open to explore, and you may think you knew it, and then you, on a whim, try something different. And I'm very pro taking risks in your career. I'm not a conflictual person. I don't like conflict. And I think after working for law firms when I was at university, I realized that maybe I don't want to spend my life fighting with people. So think about, what are your personality traits? Alone and on your own time, which means maybe coding and things like that is good for you. Or do you thrive in competitive? Do you like in environments that are zero-sum games that are really intense? Will be very difficult for you to graduate with honors, because it's very hard to write a thesis that will make both happy. So you're going to have to choose. So it became a practical thing. And I just said, well, I'll do economics, because I really wanted to get in a liberal arts environment, the economics side down, and I could take other classes to get my love of, politics and government. So there may be some practical concerns that dictate that.
Some other question. What major?
If I won, I've got a 4-year-old. I want her to learn how to start coding, as soon as possible. So for me, that's the most important language for her to be. And I grew up at the border to Mexico and Laredo, but I'm big in. And so they're the two tops that I would
Thank
recommend. You're welcome.
I also had a question.
Yes.
As a woman in a male-dominated field, how would you encourage the next generation of women to face gender bias?
That's a good question. There's so much going on in this space, and it's always it's tricky what you say, what you don't say, and being politically correct. And the one thing I appreciated when I was working for one of the banks is the head of the division globally. He organized a lunch for a bunch of women, and he said, HR would probably fire me for telling you this. He said, but he said, I'm going to tell you how it really is, because you have sort of these two faces. You have one face that's trying to do lip service for what they think people want to hear, and HR departments run that, and they say all the right things, but they're not necessarily doing what they're saying, and what this, you need to go out and build relationships. You need to be as involved, because a lot of the men they go play golf with the other men, they go socialize after work, and they're bonding, and they're building trust and relationships. And so it's about relationship building. I'm a big sports player, so I was always hey, I want to go on that golf day, or I want to go on that shooting day, or yes, I'd be exhausted after a day at the market, but yeah, I'll go. Y'all are going to go out after work. Yeah, I'll go, because I didn't want to miss out on the networking side. So I think to say, well, I'm a woman and you need to treat me different. Nobody's going to treat you differently just because you're a woman. You have to work maybe sometimes, even harder. And they'll do special programs where, there'll be women's organizations, and they're doing it because you're the token woman who's doing this, and they want to be seen to be doing it, but it didn't really add anything. Sometimes I thought I'd go to these talks, and I almost felt it was like, I'm not any different. I was like, I'm not different because I'm a woman. So I feel a little bit funny about it sometimes, because I think I don't want to be treated differently because I'm a woman. And I appreciate that you say, oh, we're going to try to help and whatever, but I just want to be the best at what I'm doing and be great at what I'm doing and build relationships and not let it get to me. And that's just, life. There's always going to be tough people, tough personalities that you're going to have to interact with. So as a woman, I would say, don't make it about being a woman. That's what I would say. Make it about you, what you're good at. If it's not getting recognized, or you're not getting, the pay that you need, or you're not getting the opportunities that you need, go out there and ask for it. Go out there and prove it. Don't complain. Oh, it's because I'm a woman. Like, I just wouldn't do that. And if you're in an organization that has a culture that you feel, I worked for one organization, I hate to say names, but I was always told I get promoted. I didn't get promoted. I just left. I wasn't going to complain, or, I spoke with my actions, and I left, and I went to another organization where I was given those opportunities, and I was put in an environment that was as competitive, if not more competitive, but I was able to achieve what I wanted to achieve based on me going after it, and not feeling that I was in a culture where, maybe I was held back because I wasn't part of that boys club. Who knows? Yeah. But I don't like to complain, and I think you'll get a lot more done if you take action.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's my advice. That's my advice.
Thank you.
I'm telling you the way I see it and the way I experienced it.
That's really good. Thank you.
So it looks like we have a question from Alyssa. So
yeah, so I actually had like 2 separate questions, so bear with me. The first one is, I heard a lot